Manley.
He is an amazing campaign manager. He's done a great job, and we have a great crew of dedicated volunteers on this campaign. I am floored. I am pumped right up. I am filled with hope, and I am more determined than ever that we are going to take this riding and turn it green on October 19th. Are you all looking forward to a new government on October 19th? You don't sound too enthusiastic. Really? You're ready? Are you ready? I'm ready for a new government on October 19th, and I know that on Vancouver Island we are not going to see Conservatives elected here. It doesn't matter how you slice it and dice it. People in this riding and people up and down Vancouver Island have had enough. And when we go into the north end of Nanaimo and talk to people about the Green Party, they're telling us, I've voted Conservative, I'm 75 years old, I've been voting Conservative all my life, and I'm not voting for Stephen Harper this time around. So people are fed up. But what I'm excited about more than anything is the vision that the Green Party has for where we're going in the future. And that's outlined in our policy book. You can find it online. We are the one party that has a full policy book available and transparent on the internet, online. It's fully searchable and hyperlinked. So you can go on the Green Party's website and search any issue that you can think of, and you are likely to find it there. I've been asked about a couple of policies that aren't in the policy book. One was on transhumanism. I had to look that up.
What?
But I know what transhumanism now is about now, and I'm sure that at some point we'll develop a policy around that, or a position around that. And that's the integration of humans and technology. So, something coming down the pipe. We're already integrated with our phones, but I can go through this book, the policy book, and find all kinds of issues. You know, from economics, how the Green Party would handle industries like mining, forestry, tourism, how the Green Party would deal with climate change. We've got a serious climate action plan, and it's one that's recognized by the climate scientists who have been working on this issue for years. That people like James Hansen, who's with NASA, used to be with NASA, one of the climate scientists, recognizes that our plan is a doable plan, and a plan that needs to happen. It's not about, you know, putting carbon into the free market and letting Wall Street solve our problems. It's about a different way of pricing carbon and making sure that it's redistributed so that everybody has a carbon budget and is able to upgrade and make sure that we waste less energy, we're more efficient, and that we're not all actively taking part in this problem. There's great environmental policy in there, of course. That's what I expected when I first cracked that open. But there's also really good social policy. And if you look under the people section, you'll find policy for youth, childcare, seniors, families, Aboriginal, women, transgender, gay, lesbian, healthcare. Think of an area that you're interested in, and you're going to find policy in there. There's great policy on international relations. What we would do about the financial system where people are able to do transactions in nanoseconds, where billionaires are able to move money around the globe and crash economies by betting on financial, by betting on currencies, or betting against, finances, betting against companies through hedge funds and derivatives. So things like the Tobin tax, the Robin Hood tax, and then there's a whole section on good governance. And that's about how are we going to make our democracy better? How are we going to improve our democracy? Do you think we need improvements in democracy? Anybody here? Anybody here think that we could use proportional representation in this country? Anybody here think that we need to do something about cleaning up the Senate? Anybody think that we are allowing the Prime Minister to have too much power and his budget's too big? Is there anybody here that's tired of seeing MPs vote along the same lines as their leaders in a bloc? Whether it's for the Canada China FIFA, like the Conservatives, or Bill C-51, like the Liberals, or for trade agreements, like all of the parties, except for the Greens? Do people here think that MPs should represent their constituents? That's all in the big government section. The forward of Vision Green is what is the most important part. And that's about how MPs behave in Parliament and how MPs will be treated by the party. And that means that MPs will be respectful to other MPs, that they will not heckle in the House of Parliament, that they will not be hyper-partisan, that they will work across party lines for the good of citizens, for good public policy, and that MPs will not be whipped. They will not be told what to say by party leaders and party bureaucrats, and they will not be told how to vote by party leaders and party bureaucrats. And then Elizabeth May encouraged me to run. She encouraged me for a long, long time. When she first asked me, I said no. And it was because I was a member of another party and I was, not very happy with the way they had treated me. But I still said no, and it wasn't for another 4 months watching that other party abandon its own principles and values, key core principles and values for me, that I decided I was moving on. But I still wasn't convinced I was running green. It was actually people in this community that convinced me that I should still stand up and run. I got tons of email from people, tons of messages that said, "Don't give up, Paul. You're going to be a good representative for this community. We've seen what you've done in this community. We've seen how you stood up and selflessly worked for the community." And that's the kind. I've been doing that work for a long time. I'm not ashamed to say it. It's not something. I don't need to be humble about that. I've worked hard. I've worked hard to represent this community, doing film work, people with mental health issues, First Nations health, working on the health accord, working on environmental issues, our watersheds, the Nanaimo River, trade issues. Not films that have made a lot of money for me, but films that I felt really good about making. And films that people have told me that film woke me up. That film helps to educate me about that issue. That's what's important to me. It's not about financial reward. It's not about self-aggrandizement. It's about making a difference. And this is what's driven me into the political field, because I want to get into Parliament and I want to represent this community and I want to represent Vancouver Island. I want to work hard for you. I want to hear from people here. So, people have questions about Green Party policy or where I stand on issues, what I believe about policies, or what I think needs to be done, and what you think needs to be done. So I'd like to open up the floor. Tell me what are you concerned about in this election? What do you want to see done? Or what are your questions to me about that? So with that, first hands up. Norm.
Double barrel question, if I may. What about muzzling scientists and what about muzzling candidates?
Yeah, muzzling is a bad thing. And muzzling scientists has turned into a real problem in Canada. We should be able to have scientists, when they've done their research, be able to publish that research and talk about that research in this country. We have scientists that aren't able to talk about their research. And scientists in other countries are able to talk about research that they've partnered with Canadian scientists. But the Canadian scientists aren't able to talk about that. That's a ridiculous thing. So we learn from the research and development that's done in this country, and we have a right as citizens, if we paid tax dollars for that research and development, to know what it's about. It's a very simple thing. Muzzling candidates, I think candidates should be free and open to speak their mind. And they should talk about those issues. What are the things, what are their core values? We've seen members of Parliament who've been elected again and again, only to find out later on that they had core principles and values that were contradictory to the policies that they were assigned to. And that's how we ended up with some muzzled science, some real anti-science policy. So it's good to know where your candidates stand on issues, how they feel, what are their principles and what are their values.
I'm concerned about all the refugees coming out of Africa, and I'm wondering what do you think Canada's role should be in assisting this crisis of migrants?
Okay, so the crisis of the migrants coming out of Africa. And that is such a tragic situation. And that is based on the kind of policy that we're going to do regime change from 5,000 feet with CF-18s and bombs, right? Canada had a reputation around the world for being a peacekeeper, for being a diplomatic country that would get involved in crises and be an honest broker for peace. And in Libya, when Canada got involved in that mission, only one MP voted against bombing Libya, and that was Elizabeth May. And she said at the time, this is a dumb thing to do. We know that Gaddafi, whether you like him or not, he's got weapons cast all over the country. And if you go in and start bombing, and you're aiding rebels, some of who are tied to fundamentalist Islamic groups, that when those weapons get into their hands, we're just going to exacerbate the problem. And sure enough, they didn't have a plan for boots on the ground to deal with that situation, and so it's just turned into a bloody mess. And those weapons have ended up in Syria and Iraq and other places, and it's just created and exacerbated a problem that is also exacerbated by things like Canada's trade in arms. We sell weapons from Canada. There's just been a big arms deal with Saudi Arabia, an undemocratic regime that is oppressive, that is involved in those military conflicts. Saudi Arabia has been involved in supporting ISIL, and it just exacerbates the problem. So, yeah, now we need to fix it. We've got refugees flooding across the Mediterranean, thousands of them dying, and they need to be taken care of. We need to have a humanitarian mission to make sure that people are taken care of, and that we bring refugees into this country, our fair share of them, because we help to create that mess. And we have to stop doing that. We have to stop. We have to stop, getting involved in conflicts like that, where we think we're going to solve the problem by dropping bombs from 5,000 feet. That is no solution to conflict anywhere on the planet. Core principle of the Green Party: nonviolence. Yeah, 6 core principles: nonviolence, social justice. Let's take care of each other. Let's take care of people elsewhere around the planet so they can stay, in their communities and in their homes and live decent lives and not have to leave either from war, famine, environmental degradation. We're going to see a whole lot of climate refugees coming around soon because of what's happening to the planet. We need to make sure that we take care of people where they are. The other ones: sustainability, ecological wisdom. Let's have some wisdom about the environment in which we live and how we thrive in it, or how, when we destroy it, we're in trouble. Participatory democracy, another core principle of the Green Party, and respect for diversity. So respecting the differences between us, respecting other people, respecting other religions and cultures, making sure that we treat each other well. Those are the 6 core principles of the Green Party, and this policy book is based on those principles. All of those policies come from those values. Any other questions?
How does the Green Party plan to restore a lot of the undoing of social programs or infrastructure that the Conservatives have done over the last 10 years without taking on a deficit?
So how do we plan on fixing what's been undone without taking on a deficit? So in terms of regulation, we have to re-regulate. You know, those things that have been deregulated, we need to fix those things. There's some core problems with that, because that, Bill C-38, Bill C-45, those were big omnibus bills. For those that you don't understand, omnibus bills, that's when you put a whole bunch of other chunks of legislation into a budget bill, and it's kind of like a poison pill. And that means that conservative members of parliament who might not have agreed with those individual chunks of deregulation or legislation couldn't vote against it, because if they voted against it, they'd be voting against their budget, their government budget, and that's a vote of confidence. And when the government loses confidence in the House of Commons, the government falls, and you go to an election. And so omnibus bills are a way of stuffing legislation in that may not be popular, but you force people to vote for it. And so we've got all the state deregulation, C-38, C-45, those kind of things can be brought back, except that we've now signed on to trade agreements like the Canada-China FIFA agreement, where when we re-regulate, we put environmental legislation back in that might block some of the investments that Chinese state-owned corporations have in Canada. They'll be able to sue us for the loss of potential profit, because now we'll be saying that their regulations are getting in the way of the projects they want to put forward. So some of the other things that have happened with this government are huge tax cuts. So you ask how we're going to pay for these things. Canada now has one of the lowest tax rates in the OECD, the developed countries, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. So our tax rate is at 15% for corporate taxes. And that's about half of what it is in the United States. So we're on a real low level, and what the Green Party policy is to take the tax rate back up to where it was in 2009, which is 19% for corporations, for large multinational corporations, not for small businesses, because small businesses are the real economic driver. Small businesses are the ones that actually hire the most Canadians. They pay taxes in their community, their employees pay taxes in their community, and they are the economic drivers. These large corporations have, since all these tax cuts, they've got what Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, governor of the Bank of Canada, calls dead money. So they've got $600 billion sloshing around in corporate accounts. And that, you know, those tax cuts didn't go towards creating jobs in the economy. So we want to put those back. We want to put the corporate tax rate back up to 19%. The other thing that we want to do is tax shifting. And that's taxing the things that we don't want and lowering the taxes on things that we do want. So, removing subsidies on things like fossil fuels and creating incentives for people to get solar panels or solar hot water or, renewable energy installed onto their homes. So if you want solar panels, you don't pay tax on them. If you want to buy a big honking truck and drive it to the office every week, and you're not a tradesperson, you don't need that truck, you're not a farmer, you're not in business that requires you to have a big pickup truck, well, you should pay full tax for it. If you want to buy a electric car, then you shouldn't pay tax on it. That's about tax shifting. And so we talk about tax shifting, it's in the policy book all through the place. There's great examples about how we would pay for things in our Medicare program. Because we want to we want a national pharmacare program. We want better community care. We want better home care. We want to make sure that people are taken care of in the communities before they hit the hospital. Because that's where our healthcare system costs tens of thousands of dollars when people are already sick, because we have a sickness care system. And so some of the tax shifting that we have in there, a really good example is if you look at junk food. Look at advertising on television for junk food. Look at the posters, the ads, all that stuff, the glitzy stuff that entices kids to eat food that's empty calories, right? No nutritional value, fills them up, causes diabetes, heart disease, cancer, obesity. Great problem for our healthcare system. When those companies are marketing to our kids, that's a tax write-off. They don't pay taxes They actually write the cost of that off against their profits. We think that's a ridiculous thing to do. So we would say, you want to market junk food to kids? That's not a tax write-off. That's not an expense that you can take off of your profits. And so we would take the money the tax dollars that comes from that and put it into healthy programs for kids. There's lots of examples like tax shifting, like moving things around in a way that a lot of common sense. I think probably our policies on addressing climate change, because we have a solid policy to do it, and we don't believe, like the other parties do, that we can continue to expand the tar sands beyond the 2 million barrels per day that are being extracted from the tar sands. We don't believe that we can continue to do that and have a real climate change plan. We don't believe that we can continue to burn coal to generate electricity in this country and have a real climate plan. So we've got, ideas that some people might think are radical, like not having any more new raw bitumen pipelines out of the tar sands. People might think it's radical that we want an east-west hydro system. All of our hydro lines, you know which way they run right now? North-south. And so Alberta burns lots of coal. British Columbia's got lots of hydro. Saskatchewan burns coal to generate electricity, and Manitoba has hydro. What's the matter with this picture? Right? Why are we not running a grid that's east to west so we can provide renewable hydro to Alberta, and they can shut down their coal-fired generators, which are a bigger problem than the oil sands.
So then how do you answer, if I'm playing devil's advocate and I'm with the mindset that somebody might come back at you and say, hey Paul, but we use so much oil, and you drive your car, and we have all of these products made of oil, all of this bitumen, and if we didn't have that bitumen coming out of the earth, then we wouldn't have all of these things. Like how do you counter that argument?
Well, you can make plastics out of plant material, hemp, corn, all kinds of different waste plant material that you can make plastics from. So we don't necessarily have to make them out of bitumen. Although bitumen makes really high grade kind of plastic and shouldn't be burned at all. It should be used for those kind of things, if anything at all. Yes, I drive a car, and at some stage I'd like to have an electric car that plugs into my solar panels on my roof, that's tied into a grid, that's set up with co-ops around the community that have solar, wind, tidal, geothermal to generate the electricity that we need. We can transition, and we will transition, or we will die. Our future generations on this planet are going to be in serious trouble unless we do something about it. I know you mentioned to me thermite before too. It's something thorium reactors, hydrogen fuel. So there's all kinds of other technology. Why are we not refining oil in Alberta instead of piping it off raw? And that's common sense. That is a total common sense thing to do. If we were to have one piece of infrastructure built in northern Alberta, it would be an upgrader. So that we're not shipping diluted bitumen through pipelines, because that stuff is super corrosive, is highly toxic, is very flammable, it wears through the pipes. Like Energy East, Line 9, those pipelines they want to have going to Eastern Canada, those are gas pipelines. They're not built to ship diluted bitumen through. And where they've done this in other parts, like in North America, where they've done this down in the States, those pipelines have leaked. Kalamazoo was not meant to be shipping diluted bitumen, that pipeline. And so refining creates jobs. We have a refinery right here in Burrard Inlet. There used to be 3 of them. We have 1 left. And Kinder Morgan won't even give them enough supply to run it at full capacity. Because they'd rather ship product off, have it refined elsewhere, more profitable, and then have us import refined product here. And we wonder why fuel costs us so much money. People will say, well, refineries, that's not economically feasible in this country to build refineries. And I say, nonsense. Absolute nonsense. I'm on the board for Mid-Island Co-op, We're one of 250 co-ops that own the 7th largest refinery in Canada, in Regina. FCL, Federated Co-ops Limited. And in the last bunch of years, 2011, 2012, they spent $3 billion to double the size of that refinery. Why did they do that? Because there's a market right here in Canada for Canadian fuel. And so they're selling gas to a Canadian market. That refinery makes sense to them. When it's a company like Kinder Morgan, which is based out of the States and has no interest in Canadian consumers at all, then it makes a lot of sense for them just to ship it off raw, get whatever they can get out of it, and that's the end of the line for them. But we need to move away from fossil fuels. The writing is on the wall. Anybody that's seen the weather, anybody paying attention to the weather here this summer? Canadians have the supply of energy that they need towards working towards that transition. Crazy thing about the way our oil system works, the way our energy in this country works. We are the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national energy strategy. When we signed on NAFTA with the United States and Mexico, and we signed a proportionality clause with the United States that said whatever we export to the United States, we will continue to export that same amount. So if 60% of the fuel we produce goes to the United States and we lower production, we still have to supply 60% of what we produce to the United States. The Mexicans were asked to do the same thing. You know what they said? No. No way, Jose. Yes, absolutely. Here we are, we're the coldest country of the three NAFTA partners, and we have no energy strategy, and we're signing on to these kind of crazy clauses in NAFTA.
Well, I'm holding here a Guardian news story from July 10th, 2015. So this was just a little over a month and a half ago. And what it says is, wind power generates 140% of Denmark's electricity demand. So on a Thursday in July this year, wind power in Denmark generated 140. They were generating so much power, they had to sell it to Norway, Sweden, and Germany in order not to overload their system. And I want to ask everybody here, let's do an experiment for a minute. And just think back to 30 years ago, when somebody came to the Danish people and to Danish right-wingers and all kinds of stuff like that and said, we can power our entire country with wind and have excess to sell. Do you think that everybody said, oh yeah, we can totally do that. That's a great idea. Let's do that. Let's invest in that. We're definitely going to do that. I bet you anything that most of the people in Denmark 30 years ago said, you're crazy. Wind isn't reliable. We can't do it. It's going to be too expensive. It's impossible to do. And so when we think here in Canada, and often people say like, oh, we're driving all these cars and everything. You know, Norway is an oil-producing country. They produce the same amount of oil that Alberta produces. And what they do with that money, with that oil production, is they have the highest royalties on it of anywhere in the world. So they take the highest taxes on the oil, where we just give it away to the corporations. And they have $1 trillion in a national fund that's giving them free healthcare, free higher education, free childcare, and tax-free electric cars. They have the highest number per capita of electric cars in Norway than any country in the world. The only thing that is stopping us from doing it is our imagination. We are prisoners to this idea that we cannot do it. We are prisoners to the ideas that have been planted in our mind by oil companies and by right-wing governments.
So how do we stop foreign corporate control of our natural resources? That's a good question, because
That's the bottom line. That's what I think the big problem is.
yes, and
They control us.
yes, we have signed ourselves off. NAFTA we can get out of it. It's a 6-month get-out clause to abrogate NAFTA, to deal with that mess. So we have signed trade agreements all over the world that give corporations rights over our sovereignty, rights over our democratic authority. Hugely problematic. And the last one, a huge betrayal of Canadians. massive betrayal, was when Stephen Harper, who couldn't even go to the Beijing Olympics in 2008, made an agreement with China for the Canada-China FIPA, Foreign Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement, that gives Chinese state-owned corporations the right to sue Canadian government for laws, measures, and policies that get in the way of the profitability of those corporations. So environmental legislation, health standards, labor standards, consumer standards. If we increase any of those standards and that gets in the way of Chinese state-owned corporations, we could be up for lawsuits. So we know Chinese companies like Sinopec and Nexen or Sinopec have bought up big chunks of Canadian companies like Nexen. They don't want a big chunk of the car centers. Now, how do we stop it? With great determination. And so what's going on, like with these other trade agreements, like Canada negotiated a comprehensive economic trade agreement with the European Union. And that, we didn't get any solid opposition to that except from the Green Party. But what has happened since is that the Europeans started to negotiate with the Americans on the same type of agreement, basically the same wording, for what's the TTIP, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. We've got lots of acronyms here, CETA, FIPA, TPP, TTIP, NAFTA, CAFTA, on and on and on. It's the same agenda, right? Same agenda, different acronym. So, and sometimes a slightly different deal. But when the TTIP came forward to Europe, the Europeans were like, hey, wait a minute, we're dealing with this big economic power of the United States. Do we want American foreign corporations to be able to sue us for, trying to strengthen our environmental policy? Absolutely not. That's a ridiculous thing to do. And so the Canadian trade organizations, the Trade Justice Network, Council of Canadians, we're going to the Europeans. Hey, see, it's got the same stuff in it. And when you are dealing with Canada, you're dealing with NAFTA. And when you're dealing with NAFTA, that means if you're dealing with Walmart USA, you're also dealing with Walmart Canada. And if you've signed CETA and you've got a problem with Walmart, you got the same problem that you have with the TTIP. CETA, TTIP, doesn't matter. They're all working these angles. And so Germany, France, Spain, Hungary, a bunch of European countries said, we're not signing CETA, we're not going to ratify it. And 28 countries need to ratify CETA for it to become international law. They said they're not going to sign it with the investor state clause in it. So we're seeing people wake up around the world to this. Australia, which was sued, Australia and Uruguay were both sued by Philip Morris because they took the glitzy packaging off the cigarette packs and put health warnings on it. These that will want to separate the metal from the plastic, and they're melting down soldered, circuit boards to get the solder off and to extract the gold and extract the other minerals out of these things. And in the whole process, they're poisoning themselves, they're poisoning their community and their environment, and they're getting fed up with it. We know that in China there's a growing environmental movement, growing awareness. So we need to be working with them and saying, hey, this Canada-China FIPA agreement, very bad agreement. Let's work together and get rid of it. And so we have to work in solidarity around the world. People, governments, work on getting some democracy in China, perhaps at the same time, to make sure that we deal with this corporate agenda and get rid of it. Right? That's what we got to do. We got a huge challenge. Not going to be easy. But you know what? We're not alone. We're not alone. People around the world are dealing with this. And so what we need to do is stand with people around the world. It's one of the things I love about the Green Party. It's actually an international movement. We got Green parties all around the world where we all have the same principles, same 6 guiding principles. We have an affiliation, but we're not directly connected otherwise. But it's part of a movement, and it's part of a movement for social justice, for the environment, for peace, for a real reality check on where this planet is going, for a forward vision, to move forward, to make sure that we have a future for our children, for our grandchildren, and for those that follow. One of the things I learned when I was a teenager in Ottawa was about Ojibwe prophecies. I learned this from some friends of mine who played in a band called Seven Fires. And the Seven Fires, the prophecy of the Seven Fires is everything you do, you must think about 7 generations in advance. So how does what you do today affect that 7th generation? And that's this book. That's how that policy is developed, to think forward. What is it that we're doing now? How is it going to affect future generations? That's a selfless thing to do. It's not about how am I going to line my pockets and get a bigger house and make sure that I'm nice and cushy in my retirement so I can spend 6 months in Mexico and 6 months on my Gulf Island waterfront property, right? It's about thinking about your children, your grandchildren, and 4 generations after them. And that's key. That's important. That's a selfless thing to do, and that's the way we need that.
Being essentially turned on the contract, right? Not getting 40 hours
Yes.
a week. So what is the team policy on that?
On short shifting, yeah, we have actually a serious problem where people don't have full-time jobs. They got multiple part-time jobs. And that has to do with labor legislation. And we've allowed companies and corporations to do this. And the reason why they've done it is because they can get away without paying benefits. And when you get full-time employees, you end up having to pay more benefits. It's a form of union busting because we've had organized labor that's fought for, standards like 8-hour days and also for benefits and better wages. And these kind of negotiations have come up in labor agreements over and over and over again. So the workers that are there are going, okay, well, yeah, we want to keep what we got. We're willing to sacrifice what the next bunch of employees get when they come in. And it's just worked into this cycle where now everybody's working 3-4 part-time jobs. And so we need to make sure that there isn't an advantage to doing that, right? That there's a better advantage in having an employee that works for you for 30 hours a week rather than 16 hours a week, right? And having, 10 employees instead of 20. So legislation around labor policy, around things like wages and benefits, that would help to do that.
Yeah, I wanted to answer the comments. I want to come down here and say that I want to come down here and say that I care about my friend Paul Manley. So I'm going to be gone for 10 days out of the province. I want to come down here to thank Paul and honor him and pay my respects. And I wanted to say thank you to his team as well, who are also my friends. But I also wanted to mention the importance of relations as well. Paul is a good friend. We've, along with his team, a lot of his team members, we've been friends for a few years. So what I'm grateful about is the fact that I've known Paul and his wife and their daughter that's the same age as my daughter. So you can see the relation and the correlation. And I wanted to come down here to say thank you to Paul as well in terms of his support of the Adam Lamar movement. He was there front and center with us. And that's why I wanted to come down and share my gratitude. And, I think about the history of our friendship, which isn't very long, but I can foresee that will be a long relationship and that we can help make these changes for our future. And to think that one day Paul and I will become grandparents, to our grandchildren. And the fact that his daughter and my daughter will still have that same kind of relationship as we grow old together. And to think that we have that kind of support in terms of friendship and family. I also want to thank Paul for his leadership too. And like he says here, in terms of democracy, the only way leadership can work is if you have the support behind you, inside of you, and in front of you. So I can tell you one thing, I'm not a voter. My wife's not a voter, but we intend on voting this year, and we're going to vote for Paul Nanaimo. And it's my hope, seeing the future that we work together, we build a strong strength in our relationship. We grow old together, so that way we can care for our future generation, care for the environment. I appreciate the fact that Paul has mentioned everything about the environment, the ecology, more so than I've ever heard any MP mention anything about our environment in the past. So I want to say thank you for that, Paul. So I wanted to come down here in honor. We'll be gone for 10 days, and I know there's going to be some events that we would have attended for sure. And but nonetheless, I wanted to come here and say thank you again, Paul. Really appreciate your leadership, and thank you for being an example. Thank you.
He does the counting for me. Thank you for that, Fred. Fred brings up a really important point. 57, 47, whatever he says. 47, holy cow, okay. Fred brings up a really important point, and that is that what I say is there's no silver bullets. There is no silver bullet to the complex problems that we face. There is only silver buckshot. And every little piece of that buckshot is part of the solution to what we're dealing with. And so that means that everybody, whether it's Farmer Brown and the Farm Ship Co-op growing local food, whether it's the Idle No More movements, whether it's places like Pacific Gardens Co-housing, the Vault, which opens this space up for us to have political discussion. These are all important parts of the equation. All the volunteers that are working on my campaign, I want to tell you that when I get elected, and you guys are going to get me elected, your work is not done. Your work is not done. I expect you to stand behind me, and I expect you to keep pushing and keep working, because I am not a silver bullet. I rely on this community to work with me and to keep working and to keep pushing. This is about a social movement. This is about a movement for the environment and a movement for the people. This planet is going to continue to hurtle through space long, long after us. But the fate of the human race, the human species, depends on us. Our children and grandchildren depend on us. The situation with factory farms needs to be changed, because we have a very brutal system, and it's shameful, you know, how animals are treated for humans. We're supposed to be the stewards on this planet, and we're supposed to be stewards for these other life forms that are under our care, and they need to be cared for properly and treated respectfully. If you're a meat eater, you have a responsibility, a moral responsibility to that animal that you're consuming. These factory farms are also really detrimental to the environment. So, you know, these massive pig farms where they've got pigs crated up where they can't even turn around, and they're creating so much waste that they have great big lagoons with waste. This is a huge problem. And then they're using this waste to fertilize fields. And so, you know, we get E. coli recalls on things like spinach because of what they're spraying the spinach fields with. So animal welfare is a key part of environmental policy, and it's a moral responsibility.
Conversations with family members and friends, often on social media and stuff like that. Can you reinforce our arguments that we all are going out there and spreading, particularly about how the Green Party differs from the other parties when it comes to whipping the vote, which is something, if somebody doesn't know much about how our parliamentary
there's a great Rick Mercer video that you can just search Rick Mercer vote whipping and show it to anybody, and then you explain to them that the whip is a position in Parliament that makes sure that everybody toes the party line and does what they're told. And so Rick Mercer does this whole shtick of whipping through the ages. It's one of those Canada's heritage moments. And he's, writing a letter to his constituents telling them that there will be no way that I will support this, and the whip comes in and tells them, like, get in there and vote for it. He's like, what? Didn't get elected on that. And it just through history, seeing how this works. It's one of the things about our parliamentary system that is most disturbing to me. People run on a platform. They come out to events like this, they tell you how they're going to vote, what they stand for, they show you their policy book, they show you their platform, and then they turn around and they vote against those things that they ran on. And sometimes when you confront them about it, they'll kind of go like this and go, yeah, I know, well, that's not really that great, but we gotta, yeah. And I've heard that from different politicians, and it's a problem. And it's because they're told how to vote, and that's being whipped. And the Green Party has a policy against that. And it's core. It's a core principle in our policy book, and I actually have a written guarantee from Elizabeth May, signed by her, and it's posted on my candidates page on Facebook, and it says that I'm free to speak my mind, to vote my conscience, and to represent my constituents. Because we live in a representative democracy, and what is good for Newfoundland or Quebec or Alberta might not be good for Vancouver Island. People might feel differently about those policies that are being voted on, and their MP should be allowed to get up in Parliament and disagree with that policy and vote against it. And the only time that an MP should have to vote with their government is on matters of confidence. That's a vote that you should whip, because otherwise the government falls. But maybe you disagree with your government so much, when you're a government MP, so you're in a say the Greens come to power, and I'm a Green MP, and Elizabeth May decides that she's not going to follow the policy book and she's going to do something else that really upsets all of you, then I'll stand with you and I'll vote against it. And if that brings down a Green Party government, and it's a core issue, that's what you get from me. I'll stand with you. And that's what should happen. A representative democracy. I'm going to Ottawa to represent you. I'm not going to Ottawa to come back here and tell you how it is. That this is the way the bureaucrats say it needs to be. This is the way the leader says it needs to be. I'm sorry I voted against my policy book and everything I promised you, but guess what? I got whipped. No, that's not going to happen. And I have a guarantee that it's not going to happen. And I'm going to stand by that guarantee to you. That I will stand with this community. And I'm going to do what Elizabeth May does in her community. She holds 2 town halls in each part of her riding. She does 18 town halls a year.